Who's in?
I'm here because I have a conservation background, but I don't have a filming background, and so this course is a good introduction to the filming side of things.
Hello, Richard.
Natural history films are very popular with people today because they are so different from their everyday lives. Whatever they do, working in the office, in the city, they can come home and see something that's completely unconnected with what they've been doing all day, and it's a form of relaxation, a form of switching off, of doing something entirely different from the human population that they've had to deal with every day.
Natural history films can be really, really beautiful to watch. They just give you an opportunity which you wouldn't normally have to sort of go to other places and explore habitats. It's like a window into things that you just wouldn't normally see. I guess I would like to make films that that I guess would be practical as well as pretty to look at. If a film was talking about a certain conservation issue in a particular area, that it got shown to the people who might most like to learn about that, specifically those people living in that area.
A lot of people do want to become wildlife filmmakers. It is very competitive, and really the reason people want to do that has changed relatively recently. Initially it was for the adventure, for what people saw as maybe a glamorous life, although the reality is of course far from that. But the interesting thing these days is that there's been a shift, and the majority of young people I talk to these days want to come into the industry to make films about conservation, to make films that can make a difference.
Because if you want people to help in a conservation effort or in a humanitarian effort, they're only really going to do that if they understand what it is they're helping. And film does that so very brilliantly.
The majority of wildlife programs the general public sees show the world to be brimming with wildlife, teeming with herds of wildebeest and massive shoals of fish in the oceans.
And I think the idea that the old routine, as I call it, about, well, if we show these beautiful animals, then you'll care and you'll love them and you'll protect them, I think that's out of date, that's shot, and I absolutely don't accept that anymore.
And it's got to the point where I believe that television is doing us, the population of the planet and the natural history of the planet, a serious injustice by basically telling what turns out to be lies about the state of the natural planet today.
I don't really know what's stopping the kind of films I want to see on natural history television at the moment. I think they probably are being shown, but on places like BBC4 or Discovery Channel, which is fine. But often they don't get a very good big audience on there, especially not on places like BBC4. So I think it's kind of like the people with the commissioners, the people with the money. I think they're the ones who need to be persuaded that of different sort of genres of film and not kind of following the traditional routes maybe.
But conservationists themselves, it's very difficult actually to get them to understand, because they believe so profoundly in the need to save the world that they think that even public service broadcasters ought to abandon their principles and just make more and more programs about wildlife conservation.
Most broadcasters, unfortunately, have come to believe that anything to do with conservation means low ratings, which in turn means less money for them. So it's a game we have to play, and the bottom line is we need to make conservation programs that are more entertaining, therefore get more watchers, therefore push the ratings up and make the broadcasters happy.
had the most impact that I've ever seen with an audience was a primetime BBC One special that we made called Orangutan Rescue, which was presented by Michaela Strachan. And it was a very stressful film to make. It was dangerous, it was very, very tricky, and that film generated 100,000 phone calls to a helpline that we showed at the end of the programme, with people ringing up crying on the helpline, people desperately wanting to know how to help, school children raising money for the centre. So an enormous audience response. So if you ever any doubt to the power of the media, that for me was my real kind of wake-up call, not to be complacent about we had enormous power at our hands.
I'd love to be able to utilise the power of TV to paint hopefully a truer picture, and hopefully that will have more of an impact on what actually goes on.
So when a young person comes to me and says, and they do weekly, I've got one on the phone once a week, saying, I want to get into wildlife broadcasting, I want to save the world, I have to say to them, and it takes some time to explain it, and they don't really want to know, that putting stuff on the television enhances the knowledge and understanding of the public, but it doesn't affect important decisions on a big enough scale.
People think that natural history films can't really make much of a difference, but I think because people think they're watching a natural history film, that they're watching the truth, I think it's really important to be true to nature and show the bigger picture.
We have to kind of find ways to entertain our audience, but also to weave those issues in so that the audience isn't left with this sort of halcyon sort of feel of an environment, which is just simply not realistic.
Broadcasters up to now they've done a really good job and they've made some great films. I think they do have a responsibility, along with all of us, to work with the environment as it is, rather than to portray kind of untruths which are actually doing it damage.
It's payback time. I mean, the BBC has made a fantastic success, and so have ITV, out of wildlife films. Now, there won't be any lemurs in Madagascar from which the BBC has made these beautiful films if they don't point out the fact that Madagascar is in trouble. But no one wants to say it's in trouble. So in 20 years' time, there won't be any lemurs to film. They just have to go back to the library. And even then, they probably wouldn't say this animal's extinct. We don't want to upset you. But the fact is, the last tree was cut down, and nobody knew.
I think wildlife filming is probably moving into a new era, and I hope that this will be even more helpful to conservation than the films of the past. But I think, there are so many good films already out there, and the thought that they can get even better and play an even more important role in conservation is very encouraging.
We could be the generation. We have this sort of turning point, or tipping point as they call it at the moment. This is the tipping point. We've probably got 20 or 30 years to fix it. Now, if we're the generation that fixed it, that is a fantastic achievement. But if we screw it in the next 20 or 30 years, we'll go down in history as the real bad news.